Chapter 7. Johnny Liddell walked into the 57th Street precinct, waved to the sergeant who sat at the switchboard taking the torrent of calls that floods it every hour of the day and night. He headed for the staircase that led to the detective bullpen on the second floor. The bullpen was a long, brightly lighted room in the rear of the floor. A railing separated the small waiting room space from the main room. A profusion of desks, back-to-back and lighted by common lamps, were scattered around the room in organized confusion. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls. At some desks, men sat in shirt sleeves, their shoulder holsters strapped into place, laboring away at reports with one finger typing. As Liddell walked in, a detective stood at the railing, fedora shoved to the back of his head, talking in low tones with a shifty-eyed man who had informer written all over him. "Ed!" The clerk at the desk nearest the railing looked up as Liddell stopped in front of him. "Yeah?" "Lieutenant Sullivan." The expression on the clerk's face made it obvious that he didn't consider Liddell's chances of seeing Sullivan too bright. "Lieutenant's pretty tied up." He shook his head dubiously. "Anybody else help you?" "Why don't you try him? Tell him it's Johnny Liddell." The clerk permitted himself to be convinced, picked up a desk phone, dialed a number. He waited for a moment, muttered something, and managed to look surprised. He nodded, dropped the receiver back on its hook. "He'll see you," he conceded. He nodded to a gate set in the railing. There was the stutter of a latch. The door swung open. "You know where his office is?" Liddell bobbed his head, started toward a partitioned space in the corner. Lieutenant Marty Sullivan was a tired-looking redhead who managed to look mild in the face of a reputation for toughness. He expressed pleasure at seeing Liddell, curiosity as to the reason for his calling. He was sitting behind an unpainted desk, a pile of reports in front of him, an ashtray half filled with inch-long butts at his elbow. A container of cold coffee sat forgotten beside the ashtray. "You don't get around this way very often, Johnny," he complained mildly. "You give the inspector all your business." "This is just routine, Sully." Liddell pulled a wooden chair close to the desk. "I'm just doing a check for an insurance company." The lieutenant laced his fingers at the back of his neck and leaned back. "Anybody I know?" "Guy named Martin. Elvin Martin. Sutton Place." A V-shaped crease appeared between the lieutenant's brows. He pursed his lips. "A homicide?" Liddell shrugged. "Not according to what I've got on it. I've got it listed as an accident." "So what do you come to us for when—" He broke off. "Oh, that one. He did a high dive from the second floor, missed the nearest water by roughly 2 miles. Liddell consulted the envelope on which he had scribbled the names. "Okay, if I talk to one of your boys, a guy named Shire, he took the call." He returned the envelope to his pocket. "Do your boys always ride on an accident?" Sullivan studied him through lowered lids. "In this case, the call came from the cleaning woman. She found the guy at the foot of the stairs, flipped her wig, and screamed murder. Shire was on the horn, took it and checked it out." He picked up the phone on his desk. "Is Connie around? Good. Have him pick up Art Shire's report on that guy who fell down the stairs in Sutton Place." He dropped the receiver back on its hook, leaned back. "You know something I should know, Johnny?" Liddell shook his head sadly. "Why should I?" "Because it's a damn funny thing. You're the third person to ask me about that case." Liddell raised his eyebrows. "The third? Who were the others?" The homicide man considered, shrugged. "I don't see any reason there's any secret. One was his kid, a real nice number, but definitely of the jailbait variety. I've met her." "It figured," the lieutenant grunted. He got up from his desk, walked over to the water cooler and helped himself to a drink of water. "The other was Ben Mills from Sterling Casualty." He drained the paper cup, crushed it into a ball, and threw it at the wastebasket. "He told me Sterling wasn't going to fight it." He watched the expression on Liddell's face. "Now you say it's an insurance investigation. For his kid. She thinks it was murder." "I know. She told me the same thing." Sullivan walked back to his desk and dropped into his chair. "She told Ben Mills, too. She's the one who steamed him into coming over to see us." He shook his head. "Nothing to it." "The kid thinks there is." The homicide man snorted. "Spite." This kid never forgave Martin's wife for marrying him. You know, resented her taking her mother's place. You are a psychologist, aren't you, Sully? About psychology, I don't know a thing. About mixed-up kids, I know plenty. Kid like this gets a hate on for her stepmother, just waits for the chance to shaft her. The chance comes when the old man misses that first step. Did you know that the stepmother was a couple of 100 miles away when it happened? Liddell broke in. He bobbed his head. I know. He looked to the door at the sound of a knock. Come in, Connie, Sullivan boomed. The door opened. A broad-shouldered man in shirt sleeves walked into the room. His fedora was pulled down low over his forehead in Dick Tracy style. His tie was loosened, his collar open. He was carrying a manila folder and dropped it on Sullivan's desk. You know Liddell, Connie? The detective's expression remained unchanged as he rolled his eyes from the lieutenant's face to Liddell's and back. I know him. He didn't sound overly enthusiastic. Connie is Shire's relief, Sullivan said. He picked up the folder and checked through it. Now what do you want to know? You've scratched the possibility of suicide? Sullivan bobbed his head. Murder? The man in the fedora looked at Liddell incuriously. Sullivan pulled out a sheet of paper, glanced down it. Medical examiner's satisfied. So is the insurance company. He glanced up. Carpeting on the stairs, marks of his heels on the wall next to the staircase, and dust and lint on his clothes, all proof that he fell down the stairs. He grinned glumly. Sorry to do you out of a fee, Seamus, but you're digging a dry well. Liddell considered the possibility. Sighed. Sounds like you might be right, but I promise to check it out. You know our slogan service with a smile. Smile hell. You laugh right in their face while you're taking their money, Sullivan told him amiably. He held up the report. You want to read this? Liddell shook his head. I'll take your word for it. I've had some experience reading the scrambled syntax you boys use. It makes me nervous. Sullivan shuffled the report back into the manila envelope, handed it to the broad-shouldered man. Thanks, Connie. He waited until the detective had left the room. Anything else I can do for you? Not right now. Liddell pulled himself to his feet. Thanks for nothing. Think nothing of it. That's one thing we've got plenty of around here. He eyed Liddell curiously. That girl couldn't be paying much of a fee. I suppose you figured you could work out some kind of a deal with the insurance company too, huh? The thought never crossed my mind, Liddell assured him virtuously. I'll bet. Sullivan shook his head admiringly. That's one thing I like about you, Johnny. You never stop trying. Ben Mills, claims adjuster for Sterling Casualty, was a tall, thin, nervous man with a disturbing twitch under his right eye. He stood in the window of his office and looked down on the traffic on Madison Avenue. He was conscious of the burning sensation in the pit of his stomach. He wondered vaguely why the bicarb tablet wasn't having its usual effect. He chewed morosely on an ever-present unlighted cigar between his teeth. Although he was rarely seen without a cigar in his mouth, he had never been known to smoke one. He walked slowly back to his desk, sank into his chair. He removed the cigar from between his teeth long enough to swallow another bicarb tablet from the bottle on the desk. The intercom on his desk buzzed. He snapped the switch. There's a Mr. Liddell here to see you, Mr. Mills, the metallic voice told him. The frown on his face dissolved. Send him in. He snapped off the intercom, bounded up from his chair, and crossed to the door. Nup! Before Liddell could reach the door to the inner office, it was opened from the inside. Ben Mills stood in the doorway, grinning at him from around the cigar. He offered Liddell a moist, boneless-feeling hand. I had a feeling you might be dropping by, Liddell. He ushered him into the office. He indicated a chair, circled his desk, and dropped into his own chair. Now, whatever gave you an idea like that? Mills pulled the cigar from between his teeth, dropped it into an ashtray. He licked at his lips, his Adam's apple bobbing in tune with a series of nervous barks. I didn't think you'd be able to resist that little girl's plea for help. Liddell walked to the chair, sat down. What little girl? Dolores Martin. Liddell grinned at him glumly. Since when did you take up reading tea leaves, Ben? The claims man shrugged. It figured. She went to the police, tried to convince them her old man was murdered. She came here, tried to steam me into checking the case for murder. No sale both times. He shrugged again. She ain't going to be happy until somebody checks it out. I figure it might as well be someone who'll give her a fair shake for her money. So you sent her to me? Mills picked up the cigar, stared sadly at the wet, macerated end, stuck it back between his teeth. Seems to me like maybe your name did come up. Liddell burrowed through his pockets, came up with a cigarette. He scratched a match, held it toward Mills's cigar. The claims man shook his head. You know what our actuary tables show? They show like cigarettes can cause cancer. So I don't smoke cigarettes. They think maybe cigars cause cancer too. So I don't smoke cigars. Like this, I'm building up my edge. How about Elvin Martin's death, Ben? Accident? The claims man twisted his face into a grimace. We're paying off. Yet you sent the Martin kid to me, and you've been doing some checking yourself. You had Sullivan dig up the report for you. If you're so sure it was an accident, how come you're wasting your time? Way I hear it, you're a guy who has an actuary table for a heart and a filing cabinet for a brain. That kind of a guy doesn't waste time on a sure thing. You don't listen good, Liddell. All I said was we're paying off. But you're not too sure. The claims man's bad eye twitched disturbingly. I'm not too sure, he conceded. That's why I was hoping maybe the kid could talk you into looking at it. What's wrong with it? Ben Mills sighed, slumped into his chair. That's just the hell of it. I don't have a thing I can put my finger on. I tell my board I think we should hold off paying. You know what they say to me? They say you bring proof there's something fishy and we don't pay. He sighed again. There's nothing I can give them. Liddell squinted at him. But? The claims man took the cigar from between his teeth, pointed the soggy end at Liddell. But a man can't sit at a desk in a job like this all the years I sat without getting some kind of a feeling about some cases. He jammed the cigar back between his teeth. About this one, I got that kind of feeling. Maybe you ought to see my package on it. Liddell bobbed his head. The thin man got up from behind his desk, walked to one of the filing cabinets that lined the wall. He used a key on his chain to open the file, pulled open a drawer, and rummaged through the folders. He selected one, brought it back to the desk, and tossed it in front of Liddell. Be my guest. Liddell picked up the envelope, dumped its contents on the top of the desk. He pushed aside the carbons of the reports he had seen in Lieutenant Sullivan's office, picked up a glossy print, studied it. The body of Elvin Martin was sprawled at the foot of the stairway, his legs going up the stairs. Near his hand was a shattered glass, a large stain where its contents had soaked into the rug. Liddell studied the picture, frowned. He looked up into the face of the thin man. How do you read it? Mills shrugged. Clear as crystal. The guy was upstairs, had a couple of drinks before he went up. Not enough to get loaded, maybe just enough to get careless. He had one with him. He falls down the stairs, breaks his neck. That's the way I read it. That's the way you read it. But you don't believe it? I read Superman every night. That don't mean I gotta believe this character can punch a hole through a building. Liddell dropped his eyes to the picture again. Mighty interesting, he grunted. Ben Mills studied his face. Fascinating, if you get your jollies looking at dead bodies. He reached for the picture. Liddell pulled it back out of his reach. That's not what I mean, Liddell told him. Were there any whiskey stains on the steps coming down? The insurance man eyed him with grudging admiration. Didn't notice any. From the size of that stain, practically the whole glass spilled there. That's what's so interesting. How could he fall down a whole flight of stairs without spilling a drop, then spill the whole glass full when he hit the bottom of the stairs? You know something, Liddell? I owe you an apology. Here I'm thinking maybe I made a mistake about you. Maybe you're no better than the rest of these keyhole peepers. He took the picture from Liddell's hand, glared at it. That's what I asked myself. How does he fall down the stairs without spilling the whiskey? I asked the same question of my board. You know what they tell me? They tell me I'm reading too many detective stories. They tell me they're going to pay off. He shrugged. So why should I bang my head against the wall? They must have a lot of money they don't know what to do with. Mills took the cigar from between his teeth, studied the soggy end. He wet a loose piece of tobacco with his tongue, pasted it back into place. Sometimes it pays to take it laying down. He pointed to the picture. You show that to a jury as proof that he was murdered? You know what the average jury will do to you? They'll laugh you right out of court. He replaced the cigar between his teeth, resumed mangling it. And this Martin dame, she's playing it real cool. She sends around a fancy pants lawyer who lays it right on the line. He tells the front office he don't want any publicity about this unfortunate accident. He expects prompt payment and no unpleasantness. He sighed a racking sigh. The way he says it, it sounds like he don't want publicity, but if we start playing games, we'll get plenty. All bad. He shrugged. So the word is we pay off. And you don't approve. Mills started collecting the carbons on the case, shoveled them back into their folder. So what the hell difference does it make whether I approve or not? It's not my money. He got up, returned the folder to the filing cabinet, slammed the drawer and locked the cabinet. Murder, accident, it don't mean enough to us to go up against this kind of lawyer. Unless... He walked back to the desk, leaned the flat of his hands on its top. Unless it should turn up the beneficiary was involved. You know? And the beneficiary was his wife? The claims man nodded. And she was up on the Cape when it happened. Liddell stared at a spot on the wall over Ben Mills' head. So she couldn't have done the actual job. But suppose it turned out that she was involved. He dropped his eyes to the claims man's face. What then? Mills's face brightened visibly at the thought, underscored it with a series of nervous barks. My company would save an awful lot of money, and it would be awful grateful to whoever made it possible. Liddell watched the insurance man's bobbing Adam's apple with fascination. So that's why you had Dolores Martin look me up, he grunted. I was wondering where a kid like her would get the idea you could be miles away at the time and still have a hand in a murder. Mills tried for an innocent expression, missed by a mile. I hope you don't think I'd put an idea like that in a kid's mind. I'm toying with the thought, Liddell told him. Oceanofpdf.com. Chapter 8. Johnny Liddell was on his second scotch and his third cigarette when Dolores Martin appeared in the doorway of Mike's deadline. She stood there for a moment, looked around after her eyes became adjusted to the dimness. When she finally spotted Liddell halfway down the bar, she started down to where he stood. I'm glad I found you, Mr. Liddell. I was afraid you'd be gone. Liddell eyed her curiously. How'd you ever find me here? The girl grinned shyly. Your secretary didn't want to tell me. I pleaded with her until she gave in. I tried to reach you earlier. Left a message for you to drop by the office in the morning. He glanced around the barroom. You're kind of young to be making this scene. I'm over 18, and that's the legal age in this state. Besides, I couldn't wait until tomorrow. What did you find? Liddell sighed. Well, I usually transact business in my office, but it just so happens I maintain a branch in here. Would you come back into one of the conference rooms? She followed him to one of the partitioned booths in the rear, slid in across from him. She was having a difficult time restraining her curiosity. It was murder, wasn't it? She asked in a low, tense voice. His wife did murder him, didn't she? Hold it, baby. Hold it. Let's try crawling before we take off on a gallop. I am convinced that your father was murdered. The color drained from the girl's face. Then what are you waiting for? Why don't you go to the police and... She had half risen from her seat in excitement, but permitted him to motion her back down. He reached over, covered her hand with his. I said I'm convinced he was murdered. Being convinced of it and being able to prove it to the satisfaction of the police. He shrugged, smiled glumly. That's a horse of a different color. The police are just stodgy enough to want evidence. But now that you know my father was murdered, you can't let them get away with it. The girl bit her lip, fought back the tears. You've got to make them pay. They will. Liddell patted her hand. He pulled his handkerchief from his breast pocket, passed it over. He waited until she had blotted her eyes. Better? She managed a wan smile and handed the handkerchief back. Your secretary said you wanted some more information. What can I tell you? You said your father was having his wife investigated, but you didn't know the name of the agency. Who would know? Dolores chewed on her lip. His secretary, I guess. Liddell considered it, nodded. Very probably. Do you know her? Yes, the girl said. And she was very loyal to my father. I know she'll help if she can. What's her name? Lucen. Delia Lucen. Liddell brought out the envelope with the penciled notes on it, added the name of Delia Lucen. Okay, I'll have a little talk with Miss Lucen in the morning. But why wait? Liddell caught the girl's hand, lifted her wrist into position to check the baguette on it. She's not likely to be hanging around the office all night, is she? Why not try her home? The girl urged. I don't know the exact address, but I do know she lives in the village. We could find it, couldn't we? Liddell sighed. I suppose we could try, he conceded. He drained his glass, set it down on the table. I hope you know I don't usually let business interfere with my drinking time like this. He slid out of the booth, helped the girl, and then led the way to the bank of phone booths against the back wall. He snapped on the small light above the directories, picked the Manhattan book from the rack, split it open, started leafing through the pages until he came to the one-headed LEV-LEY. He ran his index finger down the middle column of the page, stopped at a listing. Lucen Delia, 69 The Mews. He looked up. Got it? The girl asked breathlessly. Could be. There's a Delia Lucen at 69 The Mews. That would be in the village, all right. He snapped the directory shut, replaced it in the rack. Are we going to drop in on her? Dolores wanted to know. We? Liddell raised his eyebrows. I don't know for sure what I'm going to do, but I do know what you're going to do. You're going back to your apartment and wait until you hear from me. The girl looked disappointed, almost on the verge of tears. She started to protest, but Liddell shook his head. You can't help, honey, and you might hurt. Maybe she gets nervous with an audience. Maybe she can tell me something about your father and his wife she'd hesitate to tell me in front of you. He took her by the elbow, led her back to the booth. I promise you'll get a blow-by-blow description of what she tells me, with no punches pulled. Fair enough? Tonight? If it's not too late. He drew the envelope and pencil out of his pocket. I don't think I have your home address with me, just in case. 356 East 65th Street, apartment 3B. She looked up into his face. It won't be too late, no matter what time it is. Liddell looked up from his notes into the girl's face. The blue eyes were frankly inviting, the full lips slightly parted, moist. It was the face of a girl, but the expression on it was that of a woman. He sighed. I'm afraid I'm too late already, baby, by about 20 years. I'll be expecting to hear from you. Tonight. She smiled, turned, and headed for the door. Liddell's weren't the only pair of eyes that followed the smoothly working hips through the doorway. When the door closed behind her, the three customers at the bar and the man behind the stick turned their eyes from the closed door to Liddell. They looked frankly envious. The Mews, in the village, is a little backwater alley that lies, half forgotten, between Warburton and Devon. There's rarely any through traffic, occasionally a native taking a shortcut to Devon Street to avoid the traffic along 11th Street. The cab pulled up in front of 69. Johnny Liddell stepped out. He pushed a bill through the window to the cabbie, accepted some silver and change, handed back a quarter. The cabbie ground the hack into gear, sent it hurtling toward Warburton. The house itself was a brownstone that nestled anonymously in a row of identical brownstones. A slight fog had come up, reminiscent of the clouds of smoke in Mike's deadline. It was just enough to make the lighted windows of the houses down the street yellow blurs. A flight of steps led from the sidewalk to the vestibule above. There had originally been an entrance to the basement apartment under the steps. Now it was used as a storage space for the garbage cans of the tenants above. This wasn't the Greenwich Village of Johnny Liddell's heyday, when the regulars used to make the scene at Barney Gallant's to listen to Barney's tales of the days when he rode with Pancho Villa as a correspondent, or when Jack Delaney's was the village town hall, and locals like Maxwell Bodenheim and Eugene O'Neill wandered up street and alley, their arms filled with unpublished manuscripts, their bellies empty. This was the new village, with skyscrapers towering over the flat, ugly buildings that still bore the grime of the old days under the L. The old hangouts had given way to the gangster-operated dives, where perversion was the real floor show. The bookstores where the real bohemians used to browse and display their wares were now given over to undisguised pornography. Johnny Liddell climbed the stairs to the vestibule, checked the highly polished brass letterboxes, found the name Lucen on the box marked IB. He pressed the bell under the name. After a moment, he was rewarded by the stuttering of the door latch. The hallway beyond was dim, cool, lighted by a single bulb. It had an agreeable smell of aged wood, constant care, and good preservation. As he walked in, Liddell could see a figure silhouetted in a door in the rear of the hallway. Liddell walked down to where the woman stood. "Miss Lucen?" "Yes," the woman in the doorway told him coolly. "What is it?" From close, Liddell could see that the woman was older than the silhouette indicated. Her makeup was fighting a losing battle with the thin network of lines around her face. There were streaks of gray in her hair, but she was still a remarkably attractive woman. "My name is Liddell, Johnny Liddell. I'm representing Miss Dolores Martin." The woman frowned at him. "Representing Miss Martin? How?" "I'd rather discuss it inside." Delia Lucen looked undecided for a moment, then stepped aside. Liddell walked past her through a small reception hall into a tastefully furnished living room. The room was almost 20 feet long, was furnished mostly in blonde woods. The walls were painted a soft brown. The pull drapes and the heavy pile carpeting were a complementing wheat color. There were bleached mahogany end tables with brown leather tops on either side of the custom-built couch. The bookcases on the far wall were filled, and the books looked as though they had been read and reread. The whole room had the air of having been lived in. The woman closed the door behind him, walked to the large couch, sat down, crossed her ankles, and folded her hands in her lap. She said nothing, stared at him inquiringly. Liddell estimated her age to be in the late 30s. In the light of the room, the gray in her hair gave it a frosted look. It was cut closely, capping her head. Her eyes were narrow, expertly tinted, each eyebrow forming a perfect dark arc. Her mouth was wide, her lips thin without being austere. The sweater and skirt she wore gave her body a youthful look. "I'm waiting for your explanation, Mr. Liddell. I suppose you know that Miss Martin thinks her father was murdered, Miss Lucen?" When the woman gave no sign of having heard, he added, "I'm investigating that possibility." The woman stared at him for a moment. "She has already expressed that belief to me, to the police, to the insurance company, and to anybody else who will listen." She dropped her eyes to her hands in her lap and studied the high polish of her nails. "But in your case, there will be a fee, won't there?" She looked up at him. "That could make quite a difference in your willingness to take her seriously, I suppose." I couldn't say for sure, but it sounded to me like that had the makings of a wise crack. "Wouldn't it?" Liddell scowled at her. "My arrangement with Miss Martin is that if I fail to prove it was no accident, there will be no fee. It's an agency custom." The corner of the woman's mouth curled slightly. "You'll pardon me if I find it difficult to associate ethics with your profession? You seem to have some kind of a thing about the way I make my living, Miss Lucen. How can you know whether or not I have ethics if you've never met me before?" Delia Lucen considered, shrugged. "I'm sure my opinion of how you make your living doesn't matter to you. You said I could help Miss Martin. Naturally, I'd be very happy to if I thought it would serve any purpose. However, I think you're wasting your time and mine. You don't seem very anxious for us to find out exactly what did happen to your employer, Miss Lucen. Why?" For a moment, a pained expression swept across the woman's face. She dropped her eyes to her hands in her lap. She considered for a moment, shook her head slowly. You're wrong, Mr. Liddell. If I thought any purpose could be served by digging into his death, I'd do anything I could. She laced her long, slender fingers. But I'm convinced that all it would succeed in doing would be to smear his memory and hurt a lot of innocent people. The frown on Liddell's face deepened. Do you think he got himself loaded and fell down a flight of stairs? The woman didn't look up, shook her head. I've never known him to drink enough that he wasn't in complete command of himself. Then how do you account for the fact that he did fall down the stairs, if that's what you believe? I can't. Did you know he was going to divorce his wife? The pressure of the woman's fingers grew so strong that her knuckles turned white. I knew. She looked up. After the divorce, Elvin and I planned to be married. He was that sure of getting the goods on her? The woman shrugged. I don't think it would be too hard. She was little better than a B-girl when he married her, and from what I gathered, she hadn't changed much. She made an expression of disgust. She was completely brazen about it, practically threw her affairs in his face. She never dreamed he'd divorce her. She studied his face. I don't know why I'm telling you all these things, Mr. Liddell. I hadn't intended to. Liddell grinned at her. Maybe because now you know we're both on the same side. Delia Lewson smiled wanly. Maybe. She unlaced her fingers, waved to a chair. I haven't been very hospitable. Won't you sit down? Liddell dropped into a comfortable armchair facing the couch. Mr. Martin hired a private detective to gather the evidence against his wife. Do you know the name of the detective? The woman frowned. His name was Murphy. He had a very odd first name. Murphy? Liddell mouthed the name as if it were a dirty word. Not Leland Murphy? That's the name. Leland Murphy. A heavy-set man who looks like he needs a shave and sleeps in his clothes. A very unpleasant person. There was an apologetic note in her voice. I'm afraid I got a pretty poor impression of your profession from Mr. Murphy. Leland Murphy would give any profession a bad name. How did Mr. Martin manage to get mixed up with a crook like Murphy? The woman shook her head. I don't know. All I know is that one evening this creature came into the office. From the very start, his behavior was obnoxious. I found him quite unbearable. He had the gall to suggest that after he finished his business with Mr. Martin, I might like to spend the evening with him. Liddell grinned glumly. He always did consider himself irresistible, and in some quarters he was. Well, I found him anything but irresistible. I couldn't believe Mr. Martin would be having dealings with a man of his type, but when I checked, Mr. Martin told me he was expecting Mr. Murphy. And he was paid in cash? Delia Lewson stared at him curiously. How could you know that? No crystal ball, Liddell assured her. A crooked operator like Murphy always asks for cash. That way there's no record of the transaction in case anything goes wrong, and he wants to walk away from it. The woman on the couch nodded. He asked for cash. I drew it out of the office funds, $500. And have you seen him since? Some of the color drained from the woman's face. She shook her head. Liddell squinted at her for a moment. Miss Lewson, could I give you some advice? She tried to meet his glance, dropped her eyes. Of course. I've had a lot more experience with men like Leland Murphy than you have. He's a double-crosser, he's a blackmailer, and he's everything that's wrong with my business. Take my word for it. If he ever gets the upper hand, he never lets go. He paused, let the words sink in. I'm trying to help Dolores Martin, and I'd like to help you if I can. But I can't help you if you won't let me. Have you heard from Murphy since the day you saw him in your office? The woman shook her head, dry-washed her hands in her lap. I don't know whether Elvin's death was an accident or not, she told him in a low voice. But he's dead. Nothing anybody can do will ever change that. All you can do by stirring things up is to smear his memory and maybe hurt those of us who loved him. There's nothing more you want to tell me? Delia Lewson continued to stare at her agitated hands. There's nothing more I want to tell you. Liddell nodded. Thanks for what you have told me. He got up, walked to the door. When the door closed softly behind him, the woman dropped her face into her hands and cried with racking sobs. oceanofpdf.com Chapter 9. F42nd Street is a tired old block using flashing lights and neons to cover its wrinkles and its scars, kept alive in its memories of the past by songs and books. Army-Navy stores sell surplus equipment and switchblades. Bookstores feature erotica and little-known titles in their dusty windows. Cut-rate stores sell junk jewelry and novelties. On the street where there were once midnight roof gardens, there is now a child's restaurant in the middle of the block and a Greek restaurant on the corner of 8th Avenue. There are double rich malt stands, a shooting gallery, all-beef hamburgers, photos while you wait, pizzas, a flea circus, and hot dogs to be had. Knitted ties are being featured along the street, where limousines once double-parked waiting for the lovelies from George White's Scandals and the Ziegfeld Follies. The showgirls and their Johns who once paraded along this street to their favorite after-dark spots have been replaced by duck-tailed hoods, underage hustlers, perverts, and queers who tirelessly prowl it at all hours of the day and night. Johnny Liddell came up out of the subway at the 42nd Street and Broadway entrance. The Harris Theater, the Eltinge, where Jane Cowell won stardom in Within the Law, now specialize in grind movies that run until 4 a.m. The Lyric Theater, where Lynn Fontanne starred for what seemed forever, now features Randolph Scott and his sheriff's badge. The Republic, where A.B.'s Irish Rose hung up an all-time record, is now known as the House of Horrors. Leland Murphy occupied a combination office and living quarters on the 3rd floor of the Liberty Theater building, which has been given over to offices for press agents, talent agencies, and the fly-by-night photographers who still capitalize on the touch of stardust that is the street's only heritage. Liddell headed down to the Liberty building, entered its dusty lobby. He rode the creaky elevator to the 3rd floor, got out and followed the faded, worn carpet to the door on which was printed, Leland Murphy Confidential Inquiries. He turned the knob, pushed open the door, and walked in. Murphy was seated at an unpainted desk, punching away with spatulate fingers at the keys of a typewriter of ancient vintage. He turned at the sound of the open door, stared at Liddell. The only sound in the room was the bongo beat of the percolator on the hot plate next to the desk. His pig-like eyes narrowed. He twisted his lips into the semblance of a smile. Bristles glistened on his heavy jowls. The collar of his shirt was open at the neck, looked soiled. His hair was thin, combed across his pate in an effort to disguise the bald spot. Well, well, Johnny Liddell, the demon sleuth. It's been a long time. Liddell glanced around the cluttered room, at the leather couch that showed signs of hardware, the row of filing cabinets that lined the wall. A door was ajar, showing the inner room that acted as a bedroom. He closed the door behind him. Not long enough to suit me, he grunted. The man behind the desk gave up the pretense of a smile. You came. Nobody sent for you. He lifted the percolator from the hot plate, filled his cup. Want some Java? All I want from you is information. That so? Murphy replaced the percolator on the hot plate, lilted the cup to his lips. He sipped at the coffee, burned his tongue, and swore under his breath. He set the cup down so hard that the coffee spilled over onto the desk. What kind of information? You were doing a job for Elvin Martin. The man behind the desk looked up from under heavily veined eyelids. Where'd you get that notion? Let's not play games. You were doing a job for Martin, Liddell told him flatly. Just for the sake of argument, say I was. You ought to know it wouldn't be ethical to discuss the affairs of a client. Seems to me I remember you was always such a stickler for ethics, so you should know. Liddell placed the flat of his hands on the desk, leaned forward. Like I was saying, you were doing a job for Martin. He gave you a retainer of $500. You on nose candy? $500. Murphy snorted. He picked up the cup, warmed the palms of his hands around it. He blew on the coffee, sipped it cautiously. So you got what you came for? Now why don't you blow? Liddell straightened up. He walked over to the row of filing cabinets, tugged on a drawer, and found it locked. What do you think you're doing? Murphy roared. He set the cup down, rushed over to Liddell, caught him by the shoulder and swung him around. You keep your hands off my files. Liddell backhanded him, sent him staggering backward. The low couch caught him behind the knees, and he fell back onto it, lay there sprawled. Years ago, I almost broke your jaw for putting your hand on me, Murph, Liddell told him flatly. I still feel the same way. He nodded to the files. Unlock them. Murphy propelled himself to his feet, tried to overwhelm Liddell by rushing him. He managed to catch Johnny on the side of the jaw with a beefy fist, tried to follow his advantage with a looping left to the midsection. Liddell warded off the left, crossed with a steaming right to the jaw that spun Murphy around, draped him over the desk. Slowly he slid to the floor, dragging the paper piled on the desk with him. Liddell reached over, caught him by the collar, dragged him to the couch and deposited him on it none too gently. Murphy glared up at him, seemed to be having difficulty focusing his eyes. A thin drool of blood ran from the corner of his mouth. "This time you did it, Seamus. I'm not forgetting it. I'll kill you for this," he blubbered. "You tried that once too. Next time you'd better make it. You won't have a badge to hide behind this time." Liddell held his hand out, palm up. "The keys. You know your friend Martin? You're deader than he is right now. You're going to—" Liddell swung his hand in a short arc, hit the man on the couch across the face, knocked his head to the side. He backhanded it back into place with a loud smack. The man on the couch cringed back against the worn cushion. "You got no right to push me around like this," he whimpered. "It's just a down payment from the poor slobs you've been pushing around for years. You always got a charge out of working over some guy or gal who couldn't hit back. I'm beginning to see why you enjoyed it. I'm beginning to hope it takes a long time before you decide to give me those keys. Those files are confidential. Liddell raised his hand. The man on the couch held his elbow in front of his face. All right. He peered at Liddell over the protection of his raised arm, and then fumbled in his pocket. He brought out a leather folder full of keys. "The police are going to hear about this, Liddell," he blustered. He wiped the side of his mouth with his hand, saw the red stain, dug a bald gray handkerchief from his pocket and swabbed away the blood. "They're going to hear all about how you broke in on me and hijacked my files. They'll die laughing when they do," Liddell told him. He turned his back contemptuously on the man on the couch, walked to the filing cabinets. He tried the keys until he found one that unlocked the drawer marked M. He fingered through the folders, brought out one labeled Martin. He glanced through it, glared over to where the big man sat glowering at him, the dingy handkerchief pressed to the side of his face. "Double-gated, huh? Martin hires you to get the goods on his wife, so you collect all the evidence you can get against him and his secretary." He held up the folder. "This is the dope on Martin and the secretary. Where's the stuff on the wife?" "There is no stuff on the wife. Martin didn't hire me." "Mrs. Martin did." "You're a liar, Murph. You sold out to the wife. You gave her all the evidence against her. That wasn't so smart. Now you have no handle on her, and with her husband being murdered." The man on the couch straightened up. "What do you mean, murdered?" "Martin was killed in a fall. It was an accident." Liddell grinned at him. "So they're setting you up as a patsy? They didn't let you in on it? This is one I've got to see." He walked over to where Murphy was staring up at him wide-eyed. "Martin was murdered, and you're sitting right down front." Murphy scrambled to get to his feet. Liddell pushed him back with the flat of his hand so hard that Murphy's head bounced off the back of the couch. "When she found out you had enough on her for him to get rid of her, they had to do something about it. So they murdered him. And you were part of the setup." "You're out of your ever-loving mind," the ex-cop roared. "I don't know nothing about any murder. I don't know nothing about any divorce or any Martin. You're in it up to your unwashed neck, and you know it. They couldn't let Martin get that divorce. They knew what you had, and they knew enough to know you wouldn't stay bought off." The perspiration was beading Murphy's forehead. "You can't prove a thing. I never worked for Martin. I never got any evidence against his wife. The secretary will testify that you did." Some of the panic faded from the big man's face. He half-veiled his eyes with the thickened, heavily veined lids. "You better ask her about that. I don't think she will." He swabbed at his gleaming jowls with the bald handkerchief. "Or maybe you think you can prove that Martin paid me a fee?" Liddell waved the folder under Murphy's nose. "You could blackmail the secretary while you had this evidence. You knew she didn't want any scandal to blacken Martin's reputation." He flipped through the reports and photographs. "You always were pretty good with an infrared camera in a dark room." He glanced at one of the pictures. "Taken from the fire escape, weren't they?" The man on the couch leered up at him. "That's right. Miss High and Mighty and the old man. Too good to talk to me, was she? She changed her tune when she saw what I had on her. You think she's going to testify to anything when she knows what will happen if she does? When I produce those pictures, what makes you think you're going to have them to produce? Murphy started to rise, sank back at the expression on Liddell's face. You can't get away with stealing things out of my files. This your picture? Liddell wanted to know. So if it's not your picture, you have no right to have it. I was figuring to return it to the people it belongs to. You registering any objection? You got no right, Murphy persisted. In return, I'm going to give you a break, Murph. A real break. I'm going to let you get out of town before I pull the cork. You want to sit around and have Martin's murder hung around your neck? That's your business. He watched the fear building up in Murphy's face. You're a natural for a frame, and there are a lot of people in this town that would love to see it happen. He tucked the file under his arm, walked to the door, opened it, and walked out into the hallway. Murphy sat on the edge of the couch for a moment, wiping his face. Finally, he got up, walked to the telephone, and dialed a number. The voice on the other end never failed to do it to him. Yes? This is Murph. I've got to see you. There was a pause at the other end. Well, I don't want to see you. I told you all sales were final. That was before I got the whole picture. That was when I bought the story your husband fell down the stairs. There's an extra premium for murder. What do you mean? Stop snowing me, baby. Your husband didn't fall. He was pushed. I know why, and you know I know why, and that's worth another 10 grand. There was a slight pause. How do I know this isn't just the first in a series of extra premiums? Because I'm not staying around. That extra 10 grand is traveling money. I'm allergic to the Thunderbolt up at Ossining. I can't raise that much on short notice. Give me a couple of days. Murphy shook his head. I'll give you a couple of hours. Until midnight, no longer. When she appeared to hesitate, he clenched it. You wouldn't want me around if something did go wrong, would you? No, I wouldn't want you around, the woman conceded. I'll just have to make it by midnight. Good. Meet me at the river end of Pier 26. And baby, don't get any ideas. I know your car and I know your license number, and there's no place on that pier for anybody to hide. So come alone. He scowled at the mouthpiece. Play any games, try to pull something, and I keep traveling. And at my first stop, I drop a note to the DA and spill everything I know. Got it? I understand. Murph nodded. Good. Play it smart and no one gets hurt. I'll be there, the voice informed him. Murphy slammed the receiver back on its hook, scurried into the bedroom, and started throwing things into a battered leather suitcase. He thought leeringly of the well-stacked figure of the blonde. If all went well, the 10 grand would be the least of the down payment of the price he planned to charge for keeping quiet. oceanofpdf.com. Chapter 10. Johnny Liddell stepped out of the doorway of the Liberty Theater building, took a deep breath as though to clear his lungs of the smell of the air in Leland Murphy's office. He moved into the slow-moving tide that ebbs and flows the length of Bawdy 2nd Street at all hours, permitted himself to be carried along by it to the corner of Broadway. There, he walked into the store on the corner, headed for the phone booths in the rear. He checked the directory, came up with Delia Lewson's number. He stepped into a booth and dialed. On the 5th ring, he heard the receiver on the other end being lifted. Yes? The voice sounded frightened. This is Johnny Liddell, Miss Lewson. He could hear her faint gasp. Oh, please. I shouldn't have talked to you tonight. Please forget that you ever saw me. There was a click as the receiver was returned to the hook. Liddell sighed. He fished another dime out of his pocket, was conscious of the clerk behind the counter grinning at him. He dialed the number again. When there was no answer on the 5th ring, he hung up and dialed again. The clerk seemed to be enjoying the electronic stand-up Liddell was getting. This time, on the 3rd ring, she answered. He could hear her releasing her breath. Mr. Liddell, you can only cause trouble if you... Look, don't hang up on me again until you know why I called. I just wanted to tell you that you can stop worrying about Leland Murphy. There was no answer from the other end. Do you understand what I'm saying? I don't think you understand, Mr. Liddell. Liddell bobbed his head. I understand. I just had a talk with Murphy. You can stop worrying about him. There was an anguished note in her voice. I wish you hadn't. You don't know him. He'll be even more beastly. Miss Lucen, you can stop worrying about him. I have the whole file in my hand, pictures and all. You don't have to worry about him anymore. There was a pause. I don't understand. I just told you. I had a little talk with Murph. I persuaded him to let me look through his files. I found some things that didn't belong to him, so I took them along with me. He let you take them? Liddell grinned glumly. Let's put it this way, he wasn't overjoyed to let them out of his possession, but I managed to persuade him. There was a dull note in the woman's voice. I see. You don't seem particularly happy. Should I be? The woman wanted to know. Murphy no longer has the file, but you do. She seemed to be fumbling for words. Am I any better off, Mr. Liddell? Liddell frowned at the mouthpiece. You really must have gotten a bad time, Miss Lucen. You don't trust anybody, do you? There was a soft sigh over the phone. I tried to buy them back from Murphy, Mr. Liddell. He didn't want money. He wanted to humiliate me. What do you want from me, Mr. Liddell? I don't want anything. I just wanted to tell you that I have the files and that I'm mailing them to you intact so that you can destroy them yourself. And there are no copies. There was a gasp of disbelief from the other end of the line. And I also wanted to say goodbye for Murph. He just remembered something and he had to run. If I don't miss my guess, he's going to keep right on running. The line was silent for a moment. The woman's voice was small when she spoke. You mean I can have the files and the pictures, with no strings attached? That's what I mean. Mr. Liddell, can you forgive me for what I've been thinking? I should have known better than to judge other people by a beast like him. Forget it, Liddell told her. I wish I could, but you can't imagine what it's been like. She told him in a low voice. Elvin Martin meant everything to me. When that man showed me the reports and the pictures, and threatened to send copies to Elvin's daughter, to everyone who respected him. She broke off, fought for control. I'd do anything to protect his memory. She paused again. Murphy guessed that. He refused money, made me buy him off on his terms. I don't think I'll ever feel clean again. You can stop worrying about him right now. I was afraid it was him calling when the phone rang. He said he'd be back often. He won't be. I guarantee that. I'm dropping the entire file into the mail. You'll have it tomorrow, and you can make sure it will never fall into anybody else's hands. Thank you, and God bless you, the woman told him simply. There was a click at the other end of the line. Liddell dropped his receiver on the hook and startled the clerk by walking out of the booth whistling. He bought a large manila envelope, sealed the file in it, and addressed it to Delia Lucen. He got the necessary postage from the stamp machine and walked the envelope to the mailbox on the corner, pushed it through the slot. The day, which had started inauspiciously with a client who sounded like she had rocks in her head, had developed into a satisfying experience. He had the comfortable feeling that tomorrow might be even more interesting. At 5 minutes after midnight, Leland Murphy tooled his 1960 Olds along South Street and swung onto a deserted Pier 26. His headlights picked up the parked Mercedes-Benz 22 OSE convertible in the darkness at the far end. He kicked on the high beam, drove slowly onto the pier until he could make out the numbers on the license plate. They checked out. Murphy cut his lights and felt his way cautiously to the string piece of the pier in darkness. When he felt his tires hit, he cut his motor, sat for a moment and strained his eyes against the darkness. He could make out only one figure in the other car, a small silhouette. He grinned his satisfaction, pushed open the door to his car, stepped out onto the pier. He headed across to where the convertible stood. He had almost reached the side of the car when he felt a sudden, unaccountable apprehension. He reached for the .38 in his holster. The front left window of the convertible exploded in orange flame. There was a soft plop. Murphy was conscious of a heavy blow in his chest that sent him reeling. Frantically, he pawed for his gun. There was another plop from the car window, another blow, and more bright lights. The door to the convertible opened. A small figure stepped out. Murphy was only dimly conscious that it was the figure of a man when the man's hand seemed to spit flame to the accompaniment of another plop. The private detective was thrown backward by the slug's impact, draped over the fender of his car. His body slid down the fender slowly, rolled down onto the ground on its face. The thin man walked over and kicked him in the side. When there was no reaction to the kick, Wentworth reached down, caught Murphy's shoulder, and rolled him over onto his back. He touched the muzzle of his gun to Murphy's jowl and squeezed the trigger. There was a soft noise from the silenced gun. Murphy's head was thrown violently to the side. Wentworth unscrewed the silencer, dropped it into his jacket pocket. He holstered the gun, walked back to the Mercedes. Sliding behind the wheel, he started the motor. Slowly, cautiously, he drove the length of the pier without lights, turned them on when he swung onto South Street, headed leisurely uptown to Sutton Place. The siren on the department sedan reached for a high note as its driver slewed it off South Street onto the pier. Inspector Harrington, sitting in the back seat, chomped on the ever-present wad of gum, squinted at the 1960 Olds that was parked on the string piece. Across the river was the light-dotted working area of the busy Brooklyn waterfront. Looming high above was the spidery steel skeleton of the Manhattan Bridge, dotted with pinpoints of light as cars flitted back and forth along its outer drive. The Olds was speared in the converging headlights of two patrol cars that stood on either side, their radios chattering noisily, motors running, ready for a call. A group of men stood in a circle, staring down at something on the ground between them. The driver eased the department sedan to a stop on the side of the pier, hopped out and opened the door for Inspector Harrington. The circle around Murphy's body parted to make room for him as he walked over. He stopped alongside the body, scowled down at it. He never was very pretty, and that slug in his head didn't do anything to improve his appearance, a plainclothesman grunted. Harrington nodded and pushed the sheriff-style fedora he wore to the back of his head, scratched at his white widow's peak. "You're sure it's Murphy, Stack?" "It's Murph, all right, Inspector." He tugged a worn leather notebook from his hip pocket. He was carrying a wallet with his license and other identification. He glanced up. And over $4,000 in cash. "The private detective business must be pretty good," the inspector commented dryly. "The way he operated it was." Stack glanced down at the sprawled body. "He was a crooked cop. He was a crooked private eye. No great loss. In my book, there's nothing lower than a crooked cop." "Sure there is," Harrington grunted. "Whoever killed him. No matter what he was, the law's narrow-minded about guys who blow off another guy's head." A screeching siren and flashing red lights heralded the arrival of an ambulance. It roared the length of the pier, skidded to a stop alongside the department sedan. Two white-jacketed men hopped out of the front seat, ran around to the rear, unloaded a wheeled stretcher. The older of the men walked over, joined the group around the body, wasted an incurious glance on the dead man. "Where you guys been?" Stack wanted to know. "You're not the only division giving us business, you know. We've been rolling all night." He indicated Murphy's body with a wave of his hand. "Okay to take him?" The plainclothesman bobbed his head. "We've got everything we need." He accepted a form from the ambulance man, initialed it, and handed it back. The other man in white wheeled the stretcher over. "Let's have a report as soon as you can," Stack told him. The ambulance man grinned. "From the looks of all the holes in the guy, I'd say it was a pretty safe bet he didn't die of high blood pressure." Harrington led the way to the end of the pier, watched a tug chugging along with a string of clanking barges trailing behind it, while the body was being loaded onto the stretcher and strapped on. The white-jacketed men wheeled it back to the ambulance, loaded it, and slammed the door behind it. Harrington waited until the ambulance was roaring back toward the street, its siren reaching for a high note, its light flashing. He turned back to Stack. "What have we got?" The plainclothesman shook his head. "Not much, Inspector. The fingerprint boys have been over the car inside and out, just on the chance the killer might have been riding with him. They came up with nothing." He pointed to the chalked outline on the pier. "I didn't figure they would. If the killer had been in the car, Murph would have gotten it on the inside." "How do you read it?" The plainclothesman considered for a minute. "Looks to me like he had a date to meet someone out here. The other car was parked like over there. Murph got out of his car to walk over to it, and bam, they paid off in lead." Harrington brought a fresh stick of gum from his pocket, denuded it of its wrapper. He disposed of the worn-out wad in the wrapper, stuck the fresh stick between his teeth. "You think he was shaking somebody down?" Stack bobbed his head. He was taking off. Had a packed suitcase with him. My guess is he was picking up a little extra loot on the way. Harrington pounded on the gum thoughtfully. He carrying a gun? A .38. It was in his shoulder holster when we found him. The inspector grunted. He must have been pretty sure of whoever he was meeting. He walks out of his car on the end of a deserted pier and doesn't even go for his gun. He glanced over to where the tech men were still going over the interior of the car. There were no prints on either door handle? Only Murph's. The handles hadn't been wiped. So the killer didn't take anything out of the car. That means that if Murph was selling something, he either had it in his hands when he got burned or it's still in his office. The plainclothesman considered, nodded. We could get lucky, he conceded. It's worth a try. Send some of the brain department up to his office. I want the place dusted from top to bottom. I want everything he handled that he might be using for blackmail in my office in the morning. He peered at the plainclothesman. And Stack. As far as the newsboys are concerned, we have a John Doe on our hands. Let's give ourselves as much time as we can to break this one before it gets into the papers. Murphy's given the department enough of a bad name as it is without having the tabloids start revamping the whole story. oceanofpdf.com. Chapter 11. Johnny Liddell pushed open the door to his office. The redhead favored him with a sour glance, consulted the small baguette on her wrist. You get a couple of bucks in the bank and you start keeping banker's hours, she complained. Something doing? He wanted to know. The redhead consulted some penciled notations on the pad on her desk. Liddell noted with approval that the sheer silk blouse she was wearing this morning made no attempt to discount her assets. The Martin kid's been calling you every 10 minutes on the 10 minutes. She glanced up. You haven't taken up babysitting, have you? Liddell shook his head. She wanted me to drop by her place last night, and I managed to resist the temptation. Pinky eyed him skeptically. Don't tell me you've really found one who's too young. I don't know about her being too young. The way she looked at me last night, she's 18 going on 35. But I decided not to mix business with pleasure. The redhead snorted. That'll be the day. She glanced down at her notes. There's been another female calling in every few minutes. She squinted at the scribble on the pad. Adelia Lucen. She looked up. Sounded a little older. Liddell bobbed his head. Elvin Martin's private secretary. She keeps telling me to tell you how grateful she is. She studied him with narrowed eyes and pursed lips. You got some hidden talent I don't know about? Liddell grinned at her, pushed through the gate, headed for the private office. Get the Martin kid on the phone for me, will you, Pink? He walked in, closed the door behind him, and was standing at the window looking over at the public library when the telephone rang. He turned, picked up the receiver. Yeah? I was expecting to hear from you last night. Dolores Martin's voice at the other end told him accusingly, without preliminaries. By the time I was finished, it was too late to come calling. I told you it wouldn't be too late no matter what time it was, she pouted. You promised to come. Liddell sighed, reached for a cigarette. I told you I'd drop by to report if there was anything to report. I didn't get anything worth reporting, so I figured I'd wait until I had something to tell you. The girl refused to be mollified. You mean you spent all that time with Delia Lucen? She wanted to know. But you couldn't spend a few minutes with me? Liddell lit the cigarette, drew a mouthful of smoke, and blew it at the ceiling. I spent only enough time with Lucen to find out who the private detective was your father hired. You may be glad to know that I was about as welcome dropping by her place as a case of smallpox in a crowded subway. I'm glad. Here I've been thinking all kind of awful things about you and Delia, and the door to the private office opened. A broad-shouldered man pushed past a protesting Pinky into the office. Hold it a minute, Dolores, Liddell told the girl. He looked up at the intruder. What's this all about? I tried to tell him he couldn't come in, Johnny. He pushed right past me. Pinky glared at the broad-shouldered man. I'm Carson. Homicide. The man identified himself. I'm Liddell. Busy. How'd you like to get to hell out of here? The big man grinned at him humorlessly. Glad to. But you're coming with me. He waved a sausage-shaped finger at the phone. You're allowed 2 calls before they book you. You can take it up from there. Now wait a minute, Muscles. Liddell scowled. You think you can come busting into my office and dragging me out? You've got another think coming. The homicide man's grin broadened. He licked his lips. I already came busting into your office, and it'll be a pleasure to drag you out if that's the way you want to go. The inspector says to bring you along. How you come is up to you. Liddell considered, nodded. Okay, we'll play it your way. The plainclothesman managed to look disappointed. I'll have to get back to you later, Dolores, Liddell told the phone. I've just been invited to a party, and it's a hard invitation to turn down. He dropped the receiver on the hook, stood up. Now, mind telling me what this is all about? The homicide man eyed him with no show of enthusiasm. The inspector tells me he wants to see you. He don't confide in me, you know? If he wanted me to tell you the facts of life, he'd say so. Liddell started to grumble, changed his mind. He got up out of his chair, circled the desk, and led the way to the door. Inspector Harrington was sitting behind his desk in Homicide South, chomping methodically on a wad of gum, when Johnny Liddell was ushered in. The inspector's thick white hair showed signs of having been raked with his fingers. The knot of his tie was off-center. When he eyed Liddell, the motion of his jaw stopped. His mouth lengthened into a tight, hard line. His eyes turned cold. Without taking his eyes off Liddell, he nodded to the plainclothesman who had brought him in, waited until the man had stepped back out of the office, and closed the door behind him. What's this all about, Inspector? Liddell wanted to know. Suppose you let me ask the questions, Harrington told him coldly. Sit down. He watched while Liddell crossed to the chair and dropped into it. What do you know about Leland Murphy? He snapped. Liddell considered, shrugged. What's to know about him? He's a rogue cop turned private detective. He's giving my racket almost as bad a name as he gave yours. I could read that in the papers, Harrington snapped. I'm asking you what you know about him, what your dealings are with him. Liddell glanced down at his fingernails, buffed them with the side of his thumb. Are you telling me I had some dealings with Murphy, or are you asking me, Inspector? I'm telling you. The hard note in the white-haired man's voice caused Liddell to look up. You seem pretty sure? Murph say I had dealings with him? The inspector ignored the question, reached into his basket, pulled out a glossy reproduction of the palm of a hand with the tips of the fingers clearly reproduced. We lifted 2 palm prints off the edge of Murphy's desk. Someone had been leaning on it, probably threatening him. He flipped the glossy across the desk. It fell to the floor. Liddell didn't bother to pick it up. The fingerprints and the palm print have been identified. Guess who? If it was somebody threatening Murphy, I'd say the Manhattan telephone directory was just a partial list of possibles. Maybe. But as it happens, it was you. Harrington stared at him, his jaws working again on the gum. We picked up some other prints of yours on a filing cabinet drawer. The drawer was marked M. None of the folders had your prints. Best guess is because you took the folder you were interested in. What's Murph got to say about it? I'm not interested in what Murphy says. I'm interested in what you have to say. He picked up another sheet of paper. Here's a notation from Lieutenant Sullivan in Homicide North. He says you've been sniffing around up there on behalf of some kid named Martin. Coincidence, huh? You're interested in a chick named Martin, and a file marked M apparently disappears from Murphy's file. What do you mean apparently disappeared, Inspector? Either it disappeared or it didn't disappear. If Murphy says, Murphy's not saying anything. He's stretched out on a slab down in the morgue. We've John Doe'd him until we find out what the hell he's been mixed up in. And you're the Joe who can tell us. Liddell let his breath out in a soft whistle. Murphy dead? That does make a difference. It sure does for him, Harrington growled. Now you want to tell us what your connection is? Liddell considered. Do I have a choice? Sure. You either tell us, or we'll take you up before the DA and give him enough to book you on suspicion of murder. We may not be able to make it stick, but it'll do your heart good to see us try, the inspector told him grimly. You talked me into it. Liddell brought out a cigarette, got himself comfortable. The kid Sully's talking about is Elvin Martin's daughter. He supposedly fell down a flight of stairs and broke his neck. The kid thinks it was murder. And Sullivan thinks the kid's off her rocker. Liddell nodded. So do a lot of people. But I don't. I think the old man was murdered. By who or how, I haven't got a thing that will stand up, he conceded. But you know me well enough to know that I don't go chasing will-o'-the-wisps. Not unless they wear lace underpants. Liddell shook his head. The kid's a little too young to play in my league. Harrington had difficulty masking his skepticism. And where does Murphy come in? Where he usually does, double-crossing everybody he deals with. Martin hired him to get the goods on his wife for a divorce. Murph apparently sold out to the wife and turned around and started building a file on Martin and his secretary. He was going to marry her after the divorce, and they've been having a few dress rehearsals at her apartment. Murph recorded them for posterity. The inspector's eyes narrowed. We didn't find any evidence against Martin and the secretary in Murphy's files. Liddell shook his head. Murphy didn't have it anymore. Last night, when I had my little talk with him, I persuaded him to give me the file for old time's sake. Harrington raked his fingers through his hair, snorted contemptuously. You expect me to believe that Murphy gave you juicy evidence like that? Just for old time's sake? Liddell grinned glumly. You don't remember my last dealings with Murphy, do you, Inspector? It was just before he was kicked off the force. I had put him in the hospital with a cracked jaw for trying to rough me up. When he got out, he tried to frame me in the Lori Lane diamond snatch and murder. And to make sure I didn't wiggle out of it, he tried to gun me down from behind. He pulled the cigarette from between his lips, squinted as the spiraling smoke stung his eyes. You kept me from making him eat that gun then and there. All these years I've steered clear of him. I was afraid that if I didn't, I'd kill him. Harrington nodded. That explains the bloody handkerchief we found in his bedroom. He sighed. When we found your prints all over his office. Some of the boys remembered there was bad blood between you and... Liddell shook his head. I didn't kill him. He was alive when I walked out. If he was murdered, someone came in after I left and... The inspector brushed his hand wearily across his eyes. He wasn't murdered in his office, he told Liddell. He was murdered on Pier 26 East River, sometime around midnight. Liddell raised his eyebrows. He was taking my advice, but he couldn't resist one more shake. What advice? I told him he'd better start running, that I could prove that Elvin Martin was murdered, and that he was going to be sitting dead center with a murder rap staring him in the face. The white-haired man chewed thoughtfully, studied Liddell's face. You think Martin was murdered? I intend to prove it. By Murphy? Liddell shook his head. By the same one who murdered Murphy, Elvin Martin's wife. The inspector scowled at him. How? By remote control? Mrs. Martin was hundreds of miles away when her husband died. How are you going to get around that minor detail? I will. Harrington sighed deeply. As long as you've got a client who's hiring you to investigate her father's death, I can't stop you. But I am warning you that if you get out of line, if you try to pull anything, I'm going to land on you like a ton of bricks. Fair enough. When are you going to announce John Doe's identity? I'm giving the boys 24 hours to make something out of his files and to run down any clues. I don't want any panicking or any suicides. We're returning the packages intact to each of the clients, checking them out as we do. As soon as all the people involved have whatever he's been holding over their heads, we're making the announcement. You're going to make an awful lot of people sleep better that way, Inspector. Harrington nodded. We figure he's caused enough trouble for enough people as it is. He stared at Liddell for a moment. Want to tell me what you've got that makes you so sure Martin was murdered? He broke off, held up his hand. No, don't tell me. We've got it closed out as an accident. We've got enough open files we can't handle without looking for any more. Liddell grinned. If I come across anything more tangible than what I have, I'll fill you in, Inspector. Anything else I can do for you? The white-haired man considered, nodded. Yes, get the hell out of here and don't get in my hair. I've got troubles enough without brushing you out. When Johnny Liddell got up from his chair and stubbed his cigarette out, he shoved his hand across the desk. The inspector shook it unenthusiastically. I have a horrible suspicion I'm making a bad mistake turning you loose like this. I ought to have you booked for mopery or something, just so I'd know where you are and what you're doing. I have an idea you'll know all about where I am and what I'm doing without tossing me into the pokey, Inspector. Maybe, but I just hope I won't be finding out about it from the front pages. He peered at Liddell sourly. Or from the obituary page. They say things happen in threes. There are already 2 killings in this one, according to you. And I might be number 3. Liddell considered it, shook his head. It's been tried, Inspector. Yeah, we've got a lot of receipts from the morgue for some of the guys who tried it, but there's always a first time. You keep talking like that, Inspector, and you're going to make me feel insecure. The white-haired man snorted. I'm not worried about you getting insecure as much as I'm worrying about you getting cocksure. It only takes the big one to make up for all the misses, and nobody's luck keeps forever. I'll try to remember that, Inspector, Liddell told him. He winked at the white-haired man and headed for the door. Harrington stared at the closed door after Liddell had left, grunted to himself. If the brass caught me buying a private eye's theory that the ME doesn't know accident from homicide, they'd laugh me right out of my pension, but I'm damned if I don't. oceanofpdf.com. Chapter 12. Elsa Martin sat on the oversized couch in her duplex, leafed through the pages of the Dispatch for the second time. She had expected the story of Leland Murphy's death to be splashed all over the first page. There wasn't even a stick on it on the obituary page. She came to the last page, ran her eye down the stories with a puzzled expression. She rolled the paper into a ball, threw it on the floor. It wasn't possible that the body hadn't been discovered. She checked her watch. It was almost noon. Certainly by now somebody would have had business that would bring him out to the end of the pier. She walked over to the built-in bar, helped herself to a stiff scotch without benefit of ice or water. She took a deep swallow and coughed until her eyes watered. She felt certain that if anything had gone wrong, Tully's office would have warned her. Still, if there had been no body, maybe there had been no killing. And if Murphy was still alive, he must be aware that she had double-crossed him. She shuddered, set her glass down, and warmed the backs of her arms with the palms of her hands. She walked to the window, stared out unseeing. She was suddenly startled by ring of the telephone. She turned and stared at it fearfully for a moment. It continued to shrill at her, and she forced herself to walk over to the table where it stood. She lifted the receiver with a shaking hand. Yes? The voice was unmistakable. It was thick, sounded choked. My dear Mrs. Martin, I haven't had the opportunity to express my condolences. I did not want to intrude on your sorrow. May I do so now? Thank you very much. She caught her lip to keep herself from asking the question that was on the tip of her tongue. But if there was any trouble in the offing, they might already have tapped her phone. I'm feeling very much better now, thank you. Ah, good, the blubbery voice told her. Perhaps you're feeling well enough for me to drop by and take you for a little drive. It's such a beautiful day. I'm sure it will make you feel better. Why, I'd love that. I could be ready in an hour. Fine. I'll pick you up then. The receiver at the far end clicked on the hook. Elsa Martin sat for a moment staring at the instrument. She replaced it softly on the hook. Then something had gone wrong. It would take something very important to drag the fat man from his comfortable chair in his air-conditioned office. She hurried over to the bar, added some scotch to the mouthful that remained in her glass, and drained it with one gulp. The car was long, black, and sleek. A uniformed chauffeur stood at the open door to the rear seat as Elsa Martin walked out of the Ashford Arms and crossed the sidewalk to the limousine. The chauffeur touched his finger to the shiny visor of his cap, gave no sign of recognition as Elsa Martin swept past him into the car. She acknowledged the greeting of the fat man in the back seat and sank down onto the rear cushion. The chauffeur closed the door, ran around the car, and slid into the driver's seat. He eased the car into gear and pulled away from the curb. Make certain we are not being followed, Mr. Wentworth. The fat man in the rear seat wheezed. He turned to the woman at his side. Not that they would learn anything, except that we are acquainted, but I'm interested to know if anybody is interested in our movements. The woman opened her pocketbook, brought out her cigarette holder and a cigarette. She fitted them together with a shaking hand. What went wrong? She wanted to know. The fat man pursed his lips, blew bubbles. So far as we know, my dear Mrs. Martin, nothing went wrong. Then why haven't they reported a body? Maybe you didn't kill him. Maybe... The driver shook his head. There's no maybe about it. I haven't been carrying out contracts just since yesterday. If he's walking around without the top of his head. The cigarette holder rattled against her teeth as Elsa Martin tilted it from the corner of her mouth. Tully grunted heavily at the necessity for motion, provided a light. She filled her lungs, blew it in twin streams from her nostrils. I've read the papers from cover to cover. There's no mention of him being found. Why? An interesting question, Mrs. Martin, Tully conceded. A very interesting question. Could it be possible that he hasn't been identified? That... The driver shook his head. Very improbable, Mrs. Martin. They could have traced him by his car, by his papers. His eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror after he negotiated a sharp turn, waited to see if he had grown a tail. When he was almost to the next corner and no car made the turn, he returned his attention to the street. When I saw there was nothing in the papers, I figured maybe they hadn't discovered the body, so I drove past the pier. There was no car, no body, no crowd, no nothing. Elsa Martin continued to smoke in short, nervous puffs. Then you botched the job. He got up and drove himself off. She looked from the back of Wentworth's head to the fat man's face. He was staring stolidly ahead, his fat fingers laced across his midsection. He made no attempt to disguise the fact that the ride was anything but a pleasure for him. Do you know what that means? He'll be out for revenge. He'll do nothing unless he does it by Ouija board. The thin man at the wheel snapped. I don't know what's playing, but Murphy's dead. Maybe some kids found the body, dumped it in the drink and stole the car. Maybe a lot of things. But there's one thing that's not maybe. He's dead, and there's no maybe about that. That's what you say. But how do we know? The fat man cut the blonde off with a wave of a dimpled hand. The object of this drive, discomforting as it is to me, is not for the purpose of exchanging recriminations. He squirmed in an unsuccessful attempt to find a more comfortable position. We must assume Murphy is dead. After all, as Mr. Wentworth has stated, he's not exactly a novice in his line. But a dead man doesn't just walk away, Elsa Martin protested. Then we must assume he didn't, Tully told her placidly. If the body has been found, we must assume the police have reasons of their own for not announcing it. He held up a hand to ward off an interruption from the woman. Regardless of that reason, there is no possibility the police can connect it with the unfortunate accident that befell your late husband. But they must suspect something, if they find a man dead, and don't say anything about it. The fat man considered, pursed his lips judiciously and nodded. They may suspect something, as you say. But suspicion and proof are two different things. He inclined his head, studied her tense profile from under discolored lids. It is up to us, all of us, to make certain that they find nothing to justify their suspicions. Agreed? Elsa Martin bobbed her head. Fine, the fat man boomed heartily. A great president once said, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." So it is with us. We must not permit ourselves to be panicked into a false move. By the same token, any threat to our security, like that of Mr. Murphy, will be promptly dealt with. You can depend upon Mr. Wentworth and myself for that. He glanced up at the back of the driver's head. Any indication of interest in our activities, Mr. Wentworth? The driver flicked his eyes at the rearview mirror, shook his head. I'll guarantee there's nobody been following us. I would have spotted him before now with all the turns and backtracking. The fat man nodded his satisfaction. You see, Mrs. Martin, we are conjuring up threats where none exist. He laced his fingers across his ample midsection. Mr. Wentworth, suppose we drive up to Pound Ridge and introduce Mrs. Martin to the beauties of Emily Shaw's Inn. The blonde shook her head. I'd rather not. I don't think I could eat. I'm too upset. Nonsense, my dear Mrs. Martin. There's nothing better for nerves than a ride in the country, an extended lunch at a lovely country inn. Besides, if the switchboard operator in your apartment happened to be listening in, wouldn't you think it odd that an old family friend, after volunteering to take you for a drive, should return you so soon? He unlaced his fingers. I do not find driving the most comfortable form of relaxation, but we must live up to appearances. Whatever you say, Elsa Martin capitulated. She removed the stub of the cigarette from the holder, blew through the holder to clear it. She screwed a fresh cigarette into it, lit it with the stub of the first. She squeezed over into her corner of the rear seat and stared out at the scenery. In his corner, the fat man closed his eyes, seemed to go to sleep. The morgue at Bellevue Hospital is a low stone building set back from the East River. The hum of the traffic on the East River Drive, the clank of the barges and the occasional hoot of the tugs don't penetrate the thickness of its damp walls. Even if they did, they wouldn't disturb the deep slumber of its occupants. Johnny Liddell walked down the short corridor, took the creaking elevator down to the basement refrigerating vaults. Here, added to the smell of dampness, is the penetrating odor of disinfectants and the pervading smell of death. Liddell headed for the receiving room, where new arrivals are made ready for the vaults. 2 freshly scrubbed sandstone tables with individual drains stood under cone-shaped overhead lights. The smell of antiseptic in here was overpowering. A thin, balding man in a white smock was standing at the instrument cabinet when Liddell walked in. He turned with an annoyed frown. It dissolved when he recognized the private detective. "Hi, Doc," Liddell greeted him. "Hello, Liddell. For a minute I thought they were including us in the 50-cent tour." He replaced an instrument on the shelf of the cabinet, closed the door. "What brings you down here?" "Heard you got a John Doe last night. I may have a make for you. Working on a missing person deal." "What's your missing person look like?" "Male. About 50. Weighs maybe 185. The medical examiner's man sucked on a molar. "Could be our new tenant," he conceded. "Want to have a look?" "I suppose I have to," Liddell grunted. "Not that it's going to prove too much," the man in the white smock told him. "There's not a hell of a lot left of his face." He turned, led the way to the double doors set in the back wall. He held one open for Liddell, followed him in. The vault room was high-ceilinged, stone-floored, unheated. Tiers of metal lockers ran from the floor to the ceiling. Each locker had its own number stenciled on it. The man in the white smock led the way to a locker halfway down the wall, pulled the drawer out with a metallic screech. Inside it, an obvious body was covered with a wrinkled and discolored canvas sheet. Liddell grimaced at the stained sheet. "Doesn't look like they change the linen very often around here," he commented. The man in the white smock shrugged. "Never get any complaints," he answered placidly. He caught the edge of the sheet, drew it back. Leland Murphy lay on his back, his features almost obliterated by the last slug. What was left of his hair was washed back. His neck was supported on a notched block. The canvas had been rolled back far enough to expose the big black stitches that indicated an autopsy had been performed. "That him?" the ME's man wanted to know. Liddell screwed his face up into a doubtful grimace. "Hard to say. Like you said, there's not a hell of a lot to go by. They took his prints this morning. We ought to get a make either from the ID section or, if he's not on file here, from the FBI kickback." The man in the smock covered the body with the sheet and rolled it back into the vault. "Medical examiner post his report?" Liddell wanted to know. "Gunshot. 3 in the chest, the clincher through the head. Whoever did that job wasn't taking any chances." He eyed Liddell incuriously. "Your missing person likely to be mixed up with any pros? What makes you think it was a pro?" "Killer practically stamped it as a pro hit. First place, he did the job with a .45, probably a Colt. No amateur's going to be running around with iron that heavy. That's strictly a pro's gun." "They find the gun?" The man in the white smock pushed open the door to the receiving room, led the way in. "Didn't have to. We found 2 of the slugs. They checked out as .45 with a left twist. That means a strong possibility of a Colt." He hoisted one hip onto the side of an examining table. "Way I figure it, this guy had a meet set up with the killer on the pier. He started to walk over to the killer's car. The killer hit him with the first 2 from the car, then got out of the car, walked toward him, hit him with another from close for good measure. Then, when the guy was probably already dead, he puts the gun against the side of his head and blows it half off." "You sound like you were there." The man in the white smock grinned superiorly. "Elementary, my dear Seamus. Elementary." There were no signs of tattooing or powder burns around the first 2 points of entry. That means he was back a ways, at least more than 16 inches. The third one showed signs of powder grains pretty sparsely scattered around the wound. That would put it in about the third zone, maybe 16 inches away. The last shot was in the first zone, the flame zone, where the muzzle is in contact with the skin. Liddell managed to look impressed. "Nice reconstruction. There was no tattooing on the third shot?" The ME's man shook his head. That would have been in the second zone. That's why I figure he was about 16 inches from the guy when he hit him the third time, probably walking toward him. He bobbed his head. All the earmarks of a pro. Not very likely to be a woman, Liddell conceded. The man in the smock shook his head. Never heard of a woman using a .45 Colt. That's a man's gun. No law about a woman not being allowed to use one, Liddell grumbled. No, the man on the table agreed placidly. But the chances are against it. Plus the fact that there aren't too many women with the stomach to put the clincher on by blowing off the guy's head. Liddell sighed. You know something? You just spoiled my whole day. Happens. I don't think the guy on the slab is too happy at the way the day turned out either. Johnny Liddell spent the better part of the afternoon catching up on his paperwork at the office under the watchful eye of his red-headed secretary. By 4 o'clock, he had signed the last check she shoved in front of him, leaned back in his chair, and stretched. Well, the sun's over the yard arm, he told her. It's that time of the day. He reached down into his bottom drawer, brought up a bottle and 2 glasses. You mean you're quitting for the day? You didn't get in here until 1. What are you doing pioneering the 30-hour week? Liddell ignored her, tilted the bottle over each of the glasses. I've done all I can do for now. He held a glass up to the window, measured its contents with a practiced eye, added a little more scotch. My next step is to have a little talk with Mrs. Martin. He handed the glass to the redhead. And she's not home. How do you know? He indicated the phone on the end of the desk. Wonderful new invention by Don Amici. He picked up the other glass. Pull up a chair. We might as well be comfortable while we're waiting. The redhead shook her head, sighed. She walked over, dropped into the customer's chair. This is no way to run a business office. She eyed him suspiciously. Unless it's monkey business. Liddell grinned at her. The thought hadn't entered my mind. But what better way is there to pass the time? Ever try reading a book? What's wrong with a little relaxation? Pinky wrinkled her nose. In case you haven't looked lately, I'm still an employee and you're my employer. Liddell lifted his glass. Here's to better employer-employee relations. I'll drink to that with one change. Here's to better employer-employee relationships. Liddell grunted. Just a matter of semantics. Location, too. What do you mean? One of them gets practiced in the office, the other in a hotel room. She lifted her drink, sipped at it. A purist, yet. The redhead scowled at him. Look, if that's a crack. Liddell held up a hand. No crack. A purist is somebody who says he was walking slowly instead of he was walking slow. He hooked his foot on the edge of his desk, leaned back. I suppose you're going to tell me that L-I tacked on the end of the word makes a difference, too? Could be, the redhead drawled. If you see a well-curved chick walking down the street in a bikini, it makes a lot of difference whether you look at her sternly or whether you look at her stern. Liddell sighed. That's what comes of entering into a high-level intellectual discussion with a female. He broke off as a shadow darkened the corridor side of the frosted glass door that read, Johnny Liddell, Private Investigations, Entrance Room 825, with an arrow pointing to the door to the outer office. It was a man's shadow. It stood for a moment, then headed in the direction the arrow pointed. Looks like we have company. The redhead got up, set her glass down on the desk. You'd better get rid of the evidence of the orgy. She turned, hightailed it for the outer office. Liddell picked up the 2 glasses, debated the advisability of putting them in the drawer half-filled, won the decision. He drained them both before putting them away. When the redhead opened the door to announce the visitor, Liddell's desk was empty. He was sitting back, with a half-smile on his face, a warm glow in his midsection. Pinky recognized the symptoms, sniffed her disapproval. Ben Mills of Sterling Casualty to see you, she snapped. Liddell grinned at her, nodded. Have him come in. The redhead disappeared from the doorway. It was filled with the tall frame of the claims adjuster. He cleared his throat with his characteristic nervous bark, walked toward the desk, hand outstretched. Liddell clasped the damp, soft hand and returned it to Mills. Just happened to be passing by, thought I'd drop in. He dropped into the customer's chair, brought a cellophane-sheathed cigar from his breast pocket, held it up to Liddell, and drew a shake of the head. "How are things coming, Johnny?" He slit the cellophane with his thumbnail, stuck the cigar between his teeth. "Slow," Liddell told him. "Anything new on your end?" Mills rolled the cigar between his thumb and forefinger, tested its firmness. "Yeah. We had another meeting on the Martin case. I told the board you were looking into it. They decided to hold up settlement until you came up with something one way or another." "Good," Liddell approved. "But I thought they didn't want to tangle with this law firm of hers." The claims man grinned around his cigar. "They don't. But now they got an out without going to the mat with her lawyers. Nothing they're doing. But as long as his kid is digging into it and raising such a stink, they figure maybe they oughtn't to be that quick with the stockholders' money. Not that we figure it for anything but an accident." The grin broadened. "But just so nothing should go to waste, we're delaying for just a little." "Elsa Martin know this?" Mills barked nervously, shook his head. "Her mouthpiece, guy named George Abel. He's due for a meeting with the board tomorrow. We'll break the bad news to him then." He chewed on the cigar deliberately. "You had a chance to meet the Martin dame?" Liddell shook his head. "I've been trying to reach her, but she's been out all afternoon. Why?" The claims man shrugged. "One of the reasons I just happened to be passing by. If you're going to see her, I figure it better be before she finds out you're the cause for her money being held up. You know?" Liddell considered it. "Makes sense. I figured it'll be easier on your nerves that way. From what I gather, this babe is no shrinking violet when somebody gets in the way of something she's reaching for." Liddell pulled the phone toward him, dialed a number. When a man's voice identified itself as Ashford Arms, Liddell asked for Elsa Martin. He drummed on the edge of his desk as he waited. The man's voice was back. "Mrs. Martin is not at home," it told him metallically. Liddell dropped the receiver back on its hook. "Still out," he told the claims man. Mills nodded, got to his feet. "Keep trying," he suggested. He walked to the door, opened it, studied Pinky's silhouette for a moment, and bobbed his head. "Yes, sir. If I were you, I'd sure keep trying." He grinned at the redhead's annoyed frown and headed for the corridor. Liddell tried the number again at 5:30, then at 6. Finally, at 7:15, a woman's voice answered. "Hello?" Liddell waited for a moment while she said, "Hello," twice more. Then he silently replaced the receiver, got up from his desk and headed for the street. oceanofpdf.com. Chapter 13. Teehee cab dropped Johnny Liddell outside the Ashford Arms. He crossed the sidewalk, pushed his way through the revolving door into the lobby. He headed for the bored-looking man behind the desk. The clerk eyed his approach with no signs of enthusiasm, fussed with the snowy white square in the breast pocket of his dark jacket. "Mrs. Elvin Martin? What apartment?" Liddell wanted to know. The clerk eyed him superciliously, seemed to consider the question, and shook his head judiciously. "Mrs. Martin isn't to be disturbed. She's had a recent loss, you know." The tone in which he said it indicated that the subject was closed. "She'll see me," Liddell assured him. "Tell her it's the private detective who was doing some work for her husband." The desk clerk sighed at Liddell's insistence. His eyes were rheumy. There were tiny, discolored veins along the sides of his nose. He gave off a faintly perceptible lilac scent. "I've just told you, sir. We have orders not to disturb Mrs. Martin. It's quite impossible." Liddell shrugged. "Okay. But remember I tried. You're assuming the responsibility of keeping me from seeing her before I give my statement to the papers." He shook his head sadly. "I wouldn't want to be in your shoes when the story breaks." The clerk looked undecided, muttered something under his breath. "Wait here." He walked to a telephone out of earshot of Liddell, murmured into it for a second. He frowned at the answer he got, replaced the receiver on its hook, and walked back to where Liddell stood. "Mrs. Martin is annoyed at being disturbed, but as long as you're here, she'll see you," he conceded. "It's apartment 6D. The clerk plucked irritably at the cuff of his shirt where it peeked below his sleeve, turned his most malevolent glare on Liddell's back as he headed for the elevator. It had no apparent effect on the private detective, but it made the clerk feel better. In her apartment, Elsa Martin sat staring wide-eyed at the receiver she had just replaced on the hook. The color had drained out of her face, leaving her makeup garish blotches on the pallor. She licked at her lips, tried to get herself under control. She reached for the phone with a shaking hand, started to dial. After what seemed an eternity, the phone on the other end was lifted to cut off a ring in the middle. "This is Elsa Martin. He's here." There was an incipient note of hysteria in her voice. "I told you something had gone wrong. He's here, on his way up." Tolly's voice showed a trace of impatience. "Pull yourself together, my dear Mrs. Martin. Who's there?" Her voice sank to a husky whisper. "Murphy. He just called from the lobby. He's on his way up." "But that's impossible." "I already told you that's impossible. Our friend Mr. Wentworth does not make mistakes. I thought we had gone all through that this afternoon." Elsa Martin shook her head. "I knew then something was wrong. I tried to tell you that—" She swung toward the door with stricken eyes at the sound of the knock. Her voice sank lower. "You hear that? That's him knocking. What will I do?" For the first time, there was a note of doubt in Tolly's heavy voice. "It's not him. Whoever it is, stall him until you can call me back. Hang up and answer the door." There was a click as he dropped his receiver on its hook. The blonde reached over, hung up her phone. She stood up, tried to smooth some non-existent wrinkles from the skirt that clung to her thighs. She jabbed at her hair with the tips of her fingers, forced herself to walk across the room to the door. She grasped the knob, wet her lips with her tongue, and pulled it open. Her eyes widened when she saw the man standing in the hallway. Who are you?" she demanded. "I thought the clerk announced me. My name's Johnny Liddell. I'm a private detective." Elsa Martin was a lot younger than he had expected. She couldn't have had too many years on her stepdaughter from her looks. "May I come in?" The woman stepped aside, permitted him to enter the living room, and closed the door behind her. Liddell stood in the entrance, looked around the sumptuously decorated duplex with approval. He let his eyes dwell on the bottom few steps of the staircase where Elvin Martin's body had been found. "All right, mister." Elsa Martin brushed past him, whirled, and stood facing him, hands on hips. "Suppose you tell me what this is all about." The fright of a few minutes before had been replaced by anger. Her slanted eyes flashed, her mouth was a thin red line. "What are you trying to pull?" "It's like the man at the desk told you. I'm a private detective, and you were working for my husband," she mimicked. "Well, I happen to know you're a liar. I only let you come up here so I could find out what your game really is." Liddell scratched at his jaw. "Your husband wanted a divorce, and—" The blonde threw her head back and laughed shrilly. "He wanted a divorce? I couldn't chase him." She jabbed at herself with her thumb. "I'm the one who wanted a divorce, and I would have gotten it. That's why he threw himself down those stairs." Liddell managed to look confused. "Then why should he hire a private detective to check up on you?" "He didn't. Why should he? I made no bones about the fact that I wanted out. He knew who I was and what I was when he married me. He went into it with his eyes wide open. And you know something? He got a good deal. I'm the one that got shortchanged, marrying an old man like him." She smoothed the fabric over her rounded thighs with the flat of her hands. "You knew he was older than you when you married him." "That's right. But he had something I wanted—" "Money. Lots of it. I had something he wanted, a young body. But it wasn't a fair deal. I didn't know how tough it would be to earn that money with him pawing and drooling all over me. And his miserable apologies when he couldn't make it." She broke off. "But why am I telling you this? You're the one who has the explaining to do, not me. What are you really here for?" "To make a buck," Liddell told her. "Your stepdaughter hired me to find out if there was anything funny about the way your husband died. I had to go through the motions to earn the retainer she gave me." He shrugged. "I figured if I could bull my way in here, and at least be able to say I'd talked to you." Elsa Martin walked over to the coffee table, picked up a fresh pack of cigarettes and slit the cellophane with a long thumbnail. "She can afford it," she conceded. She tore open the pack, lifted out a cigarette, and stuck it between her lips. "So she thinks there was something funny about the way my husband died. What does she think? That he died laughing?" She lifted a table lighter, snapped it into flame, and lit the cigarette. "I don't think it was an accident either. I think he committed suicide because he found out that I had enough evidence on him to drag him and his fancy name through the mud. He couldn't face it. His daughter doesn't think it was suicide either. She thinks your husband was murdered. The blonde smiled indulgently, walked over to a chair, sank down into it. She didn't seem particularly disturbed. And I committed it, no doubt? The smile grew broader. Wouldn't she love that? She's always resented me, you know. She's always been a neurotic kid. She's probably talked herself into actually believing it. She crossed her legs for maximum effect. Too bad for her that I was hundreds of miles away when it happened, wasn't it? Liddell shrugged. It's like I said, I'm only trying to make a buck. If I turned her down, someone else would have taken it. You can't hate a guy for trying, he told her in a placating tone. I'm just going through the motions. Some of the antagonism drained from the woman's voice. I have no objection to you picking up a fee from Dolores. Maybe you can convince her it was an accident. She took a deep drag on the cigarette, let the smoke drift lazily from half-parted lips. You're not the first one she's gone to with that crazy idea. First it was the police. They told her to get lost. Then she went to the insurance company. When they started getting in my hair, I had my lawyer have a talk with them. Now you. She got up, walked to the window, looked out. But I guess if I were in your shoes, I'd do the same thing. I've had to hustle for a buck in my day, too. She turned around, faced him, and indicated the portable bar. How about a drink? I could use a scotch. Liddell's face brightened at the change in the woman's attitude. He walked to the bar, transferred some ice from the bucket to 2 glasses, and drenched it down with scotch. He softened it with a touch of soda. Elsa Martin walked to the French doors that opened onto a terrace. Bring them out here, she called over her shoulder. Liddell followed her out. The tiny terrace seemed to be pasted to the side of the building. It was guaranteed privacy by fan-shaped opaque glass screens. Below, the East River was like a silver ribbon in the moonlight. The lights of cars flitting along the East River Drive were like pinpoints. Liddell walked out, set the drinks down on a low table in front of the couch set back against the wall. I spend a lot of my time out here listening to the river noises and watching the stars. I might not look it, but I'm a country girl and you never get it out of your system. She dropped down onto the couch, patted the pillow alongside her. Why don't you come over here so I don't have to shout? She drew her knees up under her, leaned back. As Liddell settled down beside her, he couldn't help but be aware of the jutting breasts, the tantalizing scent of her, the roundness of her thighs as revealed by the tight fabric of her skirt. Would you hand me my drink, please? She asked. Liddell reached over, snagged the 2 glasses. As he handed one to the blonde, her hand hit his, spilled the drink down her dress. She sprang to her feet, swabbed at the wet area with a hopelessly inadequate wisp of linen. Damn! She stamped her foot. I would be clumsy. She smiled at him. Just give me a minute to get into something dry. She disappeared into the living room, and he had a glimpse of her climbing the stairs to the bedrooms above. At the top of the stairs, Elsa Martin stopped and listened, satisfied herself that Liddell had not followed her into the living room. She headed into the bedroom nearest the stairs, closed the door behind her, and crossed to the phone on the night table. She dialed, waited until she heard Tolly's voice. I had almost given you up, the fat man gurgled. If you hadn't called within the next few minutes, I would have had to send Mr. Wentworth to investigate. The blonde cupped her hand around the phone. It's not Murphy, Mr. Tolly. Of course not, the fat man grunted impatiently. It's another private detective, a man named Liddell, Johnny Liddell, and there's something queer about it. What? Elsa Martin hesitated for a moment. I have the feeling that he knows something. He pretended to be the private detective that my husband hired. How would he know about that if he didn't know about Murphy? He wouldn't dare come around here pretending to be Murphy if he didn't know something. The line was dead for a moment. His name is Liddell, you say? The blonde could almost visualize the bubbles forming and breaking in the center of his pouty lips. Do you think you could keep him occupied for a reasonable period, Mrs. Martin? I don't see why not. Excellent, excellent. Perhaps it would pay us to find out exactly what our friend Liddell does know and how much. He sighed. I sincerely trust that we won't be obliged to have to handle him too. He sighed again. We have run into difficulties in this case, haven't we? Let's hope this will be the last one. I'd better get back to him before he starts suspecting things, the blonde whispered. She dropped the receiver onto its hook, headed for the closet. Johnny Liddell was on his second cigarette when the blonde reappeared on the porch. She had changed to a royal blue dressing gown that clung to curves obviously worth clinging to. When she walked, the motion gave her breasts a soft sway. The hard nipples traced a design on the silk. Her hair was loose. She had freshened her lipstick so that her mouth gleamed moistly in the dim light. "If you'll make me another drink, I'll promise not to be so careless." Liddell grinned, got up from the couch, walked into the living room, and made her a fresh scotch. When he came out again, she was back on the couch, leaning back with spectacular effect on the fabric of her gown. He slid onto the couch alongside her, was pleasantly aware of the firmness of her thigh against his. He dropped his eyes from the metallic sheen of her hair to the slanted eyes, the full lips and the half-concealed breasts. "I guess an old man could find out he's bitten off more than he could chew." He grinned. But he could have found a better way to kill himself than breaking his neck. The blonde took a deep swallow from her drink, turned the full effect of her eyes on Liddell over the rim of her glass. She lowered the glass from her lips, leaned over, set it on the table. "You know why I'm sitting here with you like this, Liddell?" she asked. "I never was one to look a gift horse in the mouth." She leaned back, smiled at him. "It's because I've got a feeling we're the same kind of people." "How's that?" She shrugged. "We both had to make it the hard way. I started in a dive in Carsonet City, hustling butts, drinking ginger ale with marks who were paying champagne prices for it, setting drunks up for the rollers. I made a buck when and how I could. The big break came when Elvin Martin came along and got hooked. And me?" She eyed him appraisingly. "You sound and look like a guy who knows what he wants and takes it no matter what anybody says. I like people like that. You can get awful sick of these mealy-mouthed big businessmen who go around telling everybody how holy and ethical they are, and all the time they'd steal the eyes out of a corpse. We're all out for number one, Liddell, me, you, the Elvin Martins, the rest of the holier-than-thous. The difference is, people like you and me, we admit it." She took another swallow from her glass. "I wanted what Martin's money could give me, so I put a price tag on what he wanted." She raised the glass to her lips again, drained it, and set it down. "It was pretty bad, for him and for me. It's not easy, you know, with an old man. His whining and fumbling and apologizing almost drove me crazy." "It couldn't have been much fun," Liddell agreed. The blonde shook her head. It wasn't. She dropped her hand into Liddell's lap, smiled at the sudden strained expression in his eyes. She contrasted the taut hardness of his body to the soft flabbiness of the man she married. "I used to walk out on him, leave him crying and come out here and sit, trying to remember what it was like with a young man, a strong man." She removed her hand, leaned back. Her eyes were half closed, gleaming in the light. It was torture, trying to remember. Liddell drained his glass, set it on the table beside hers. When he turned back, she had leaned forward. He could feel her breath on his face. His nostrils were filled with her perfume. He slipped his arm around her waist. Her skin was smooth and cool through the sheerness of her gown. His mouth found hers. Her lips were alive and demanding. After a moment, she put the flat of her hands against his chest, pushed him away. "Maybe we'd better go inside. It gets chilly out here at night." Liddell stood up, scooped her up in his arms, headed into the living room and across to the stairs. Her gown fell open. Her breasts were full, round, their pink tips straining upward. "You'll never know how glad I am I told you to come up," she told him softly. She managed to give him some indication. oceanofpdf.com. Chapter 14. It was almost midnight when Johnny Liddell stepped out of the elevator cage on his floor of the building that housed his office. He walked down the corridor, put his key into the lock, pushed open the frosted glass door to the outer office, and walked in. He was about to reach for the light switch when he noticed a thin ribbon of light under the door to the private office. He transferred his .45 from its shoulder holster into his right hand, pushed his way through the gate in the partition, noiselessly circled Pinky's desk. He stopped outside the door marked